Thanks for joining in. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming here to learn about React. A special thanks to Elizabeth, of course, for making this happen and facilitating this. So the topic today is on React and what it is and what it's used for, what problems it solves in front-end JavaScript, and how it solves those problems. And along with that, we will be building an actual React application, a small one, but hopefully it will give you an idea of how React does things, and it will give you an idea of React's take on front-end development. And during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can let me know through the Q&A box, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. So let's also talk more about what I hope you to get from this this presentation. I hope to at least give you a taste of what React does and how it does it, and also hopefully make you want to take up React as a or at least decide for yourself if React is for you, and if you want to investigate it any further. And for that purpose, I also have some resources that at the end that you can maybe explore on your own when you can. So yeah, let's get started. What is React? Well, React is a JavaScript library. It has implementations of some other languages as well, but we'll pretend that it's just JavaScript library because that's what our focus is on at this moment. And UI library developed at Facebook. So UI means that it helps with creating user interface components, graphical user interface components. And it was developed by Facebook. And the second thing is that it's used to develop single-page applications. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. What are single-page applications? Single-page applications are applications in which the UI is rendered, the UI is updated on the client side, and the server side only has to transfer data, or actually send response. So the client sends a request to the server, and it gets back a response, and it using JavaScript, the client repopulates or updates the UI or the DOM of the application. It encourages a declarative style of UI development. Well, that's another property of React, that it is a more declarative type of, encourages more declarative type of programming. And what is declarative? Well, a good example of a declarative program is using map versus using a for loop, and using that for loop to transform a list, and using map to transform a list. Map gives you the intention better, and you don't have to do a lot of create a new array and change each element of this existing array, and then push that element to the new array. So that's that's what's called imperative. You're telling the computer, you're explicitly stating what steps to take. And declarative is basically declaring what to do and map it, right? Just map this list to another list. So it's declarative, and we'll see how this is manifested in React. It encourages reusable components. Components are a very important concept in React. So React allows us to use components, define a function or a class that's basically a blueprint for a component, and then you can create reusable incarnations or let's say instantiations of that component. So if you, let's say, for example, I have a product component, I can use that component and instantiate it in different places in my application with different properties. And so I only have to define it once and I can use it repeatedly. And components, what components do is that they encapsulate the shape. The shape is what's inside of it, where it's different constituents, like a paragraph, it has a paragraph, it has heading and so on. And the behavior. So what happens when you click a part of that component? That's another thing that the component encapsulates. Components can also have other components nested inside of them. We will talk about that. Now, some popular alternatives to React. One of them is Backbone. I've used it. We actually have in advanced elective courses, we have a course on Backbone, and it's useful in its own way, but for small applications. But people have found out that for larger applications, it gets messy and it's difficult to maintain. Ember and Angular, they are more of MVC frameworks. They do much more than React does, and sometimes you don't need all of that baggage. And some people prefer those. That's fine. Today we'll talk about React. Vue is another new competitor in this market. I don't know a lot about Vue, but it's also people find it to be a useful tool. All right, Vue. So what is React for? What are the problems that React attempts to solve? Well, the first of the problems is that DOM renders are expensive, especially for applications with frequently changing state. So if your application gets a lot of data from the server with scrolling, for example, or with user interactions of any kind, and a lot of data is being changed, or a lot of data is being transferred from the server to the client, or may not have to be from the server, but if the state changes a lot, then DOM re-renders are expensive in that case, because if you get if you have 1,000 list items and one of those changes, well, you want to be able to just change that one list item and not have to re-render all of those list items. And that's of course what people do, but we'll see that React actually makes it really easy and intuitive for us to do that. And directly interacting with the DOM is tedious and error-prone. Of course, directly interacting with the DOM using the DOM API is tedious. Everybody who has had some experience with those APIs will tell you that. And it's also error-prone because it involves state changes, mutations, and all that, which is definitely error-prone. And imperative code, as we said, React encourages declarative code, and we know that imperative code is harder to understand as compared to declarative code. This may not be the case necessarily, but at least when you have an exposure to declarative code, to functional abstractions, and exposure to that and know about them, then it's very likely that you'll find those much more easy to read and easy to understand. And they make the intention clearer than imperative code does. Okay, so that's the problems that React attempts to solve. Now, how are these problems solved? Well, what if in JavaScript applications you were able to just say, well, when the data changes, render the whole page? Well, of course, you can't do that because that's That's very costly. That's costly because you're repainting the whole application or the whole UI based on a very small change in the state is or in the data is actually doesn't make sense. But that's exactly what you feel like you're doing with React, and that makes things a lot easier, but without the cost, because React has something called the virtual DOM that enables us to do that, enables us to pretend that we are actually rendering the whole application, when in fact, under the hood, only the things that need to change are changed. And so you only have to declare how the DOM should look like. And when the state changes, React actually updates the DOM to reflect that declaration of how the DOM should look like based on that. And there's another thing called state. In every component, some components have state. When it changes, the DOM updates to reflect the changes. And we'll talk about that when we actually build an application. JSX. And JSX is let me actually show you what JSX is and if it makes any sense at all. So hopefully you are all here and can hear me. Let me just check. Okay. So let's see. This is a React DOM.render. So this is a let's first go through this. I'll go through it later, but let's talk about what is this. This looks like it's HTML. HTML inside of actually passed to this method as an argument. Well, how can we do that? If it was a string, it probably would have made more sense, but without a string, it's not a string, and we are passing it to a function, React DOM.render. And what it's doing is, it's a completed version. Welcome to the shop. It's actually printing that P, right? So this is actually a syntactical addition to JavaScript, specifically to React in this case, which allows us to basically write, pretend like we're writing HTML inside of our JavaScript. And so basically what is happening here is that you can rewrite this in something which this will actually be translated to, because browsers do not understand this natively, right? So there has to be a translation phase in which this markup or seemingly markup has to be translated to actual JavaScript expressions and function calls and whatnot. So what is this? In this case, it's basically just React that creates element. And which element do you want to create? P. And does it have any attributes? No, it doesn't. No. And what's inside of it? Well, there's a string inside of it. Welcome to the shop. So that's its child, right? And let's remove this and see if it works. And of course, it does. By the way, whenever I make some changes to this application.js file, this browser will auto reload to reflect those changes. Somebody else is asking, is a component similar to a class? Well, it kind of is, but it isn't in some ways, because it doesn't have to be a class. Components are in React could be either functions or JavaScript classes. And of course, some of you might not know about classes in JavaScript. but it's basically a wrapper around the pseudo-classical pattern, basically the constructor and prototype pattern that is used in JavaScript. So classes in ES6 are basically just a syntactic sugar to do exactly that. So component can be a class or it can be a function. Which circumstances require us to use which one? Well, we'll talk about that later. So what am I doing here? Here I am creating a React element, and it's a P element. It has its child is just a text, and I'm attaching that to document.getElementById app. So let's see this. Actually, this is not it. Okay. So this ID app, this div, as a child, I'm attaching this P element as a child of this div element, right? So that's basically what's happening, but we haven't seen any components yet. But this was just a way to show you what JS6 looks like and what it actually is transformed into before it's actually run by the browser. And how does this transformation happen in this case? Well, if you see here, I have a script which is including Babel standalone. So this is actually a library that we call a transpiler that takes our JSX and actually translates it into the code that I just wrote there, react.createElement, right? And here what we are actually including this application.js file. So anything that we write here will be included here and run. But the important thing to note here is that we are using type text Babel. Well, if we had used type something else, type equals text JavaScript or something, or didn't use type at all, then it'll automatically run this. And because it has this JSX, the browser doesn't understand what this is, and it would raise an error. So we are using this type text Babel so that this Babel library has a chance to actually change this into something that the browser understands before it actually runs it. And we are giving it some plugins, which in this case aren't needed, but anyway, I have passed them. These are for, and this is just the source attribute. So that's what Babel in this particular application is used for, but it's also used to, Babel is used for transpiling your ES6 code into ES5 code or even older code. So that's what Babel is used for, these two purposes: transpiling JSX to actual JavaScript and transpiling ES6 to ES5. All right, so that's an overview of JSX. Okay, React components. Now let's talk about components. As an example, let's create a component, because this is an application that this is a file that when we make changes to it, it will automatically reflect in the browser. So we can just go ahead and create a component here. So there are two ways to create a component. One is using a function. So let's say I want to create a component, a counter component. So it shows me a button to increase a counter and decrease a counter. And it actually shows me the value of the counter, right? So I'll create a counter, and it's just a function. And what we can do here is just return something, basically return JSX. So let's let the parent element be a div, and then nh2 counter and a p counter value is, let's say, 1, and a button that says increment counter. And another button that says decrement counter. All right. So this is basically just this is the most simple, perhaps not the most simple, but it's a very simple component that it just returns some JSX. Now, how do you use this component and how do you instantiate this component to actually render something to the DOM? Well, let's do that with, this is the syntax that you use. So this is basically instantiating this component. Counter. What this says is that render an instantiation of this counter component to the DOM. Now, let's see that. Here is our counter component. And, but what if you wanted to, now this is very static, and this is just using hard-coded values to actually display the value and the buttons and everything. But what if you wanted to actually pass it a value of the counter? Well, the function takes an object that we call props, but how do you call, do you give them those props? So that's when you are instantiating. Basically, think of it as actually instantiating a constructor or calling a constructor with the new keyword, right? So, and passing in some arguments. So in this case, one of the props is counter. Let's say counter, and the value of the counter is 5, right? And here I can use that value here, but since this is a JavaScript expression, what I can do is, so this is the syntax that is used to pass in values to a component, basically pass in props to a component. And this is important. If it was a string, we could have just said this, but since there is an expression of number kind, we have to use these curly braces. So, and let's just show that 5 value on our DOM, props.counter, right? Well, it's now 5. So that's how, what props enable us to do. Every component takes props, which makes it basically differentiated from another instantiation of that same component. So I could have said something like counter equals 6, and in another somewhere else I could have used this, and I would have a different state, the same component with some different props. So this is a counter example of a counter component. And so let's say we want to actually enable. So the other concept that here is, well, that's one thing, is that it have components accept arguments called props, and components can also have state. So what is state? Well, basically state is something that if user interaction happens, and because of that user interaction, the state changes, your component re-renders. So that's why state is different from props, because it allows you to re-render a component based on if that state changes. But if we have to use state in a component, we cannot use a functional component. We have to use a component with class, and we will talk later about that when we actually build an application. And it will be a mildly interesting application. So that's basically a component. That's one way of creating a component. There's another way which we can do through classes. So yeah, let's now start building an actual application. And we can actually expound on some other ideas like state and callbacks and user interaction and everything while building that application, right? So which application are we building? Well, this is the completed version of this application. And what you can do with this application is that it has a few products. It's a shopping cart app, basically. It has a few products. When you click add to cart, a new product is added. Click this again, another product is added. When you click it, well, the quantity is increased. When you click checkout, the cart is emptied. And when you click this remove button, well, this product is deleted. So that's the basics of this application. I already have set up the relevant CSS for this. So now let's jump into it, because I think this is the best way to learn about React. I don't think talking about concepts is a good way of doing it anyways. So let's look at this. What we want to do is actually divide this up into components, this application into components. Let's refresh it so it has all the data. And well, the first thing is a product component, right? The first thing that is very visible is the product component. This is one product, this is another product, and so on. So let's create a product component. And I already have some static markup for this, which we can use to create our components. So here is some markup where I have this product component, and I'll copy this, and I'll use this in my component as a JSX. So let's function product, or we could have just used another syntax, but this is fine. Function product, it returns this JSX, right? Now, as I said before, this will be converted into actual JavaScript when React calls this function. All right, but let's now see if it actually renders this product when I do this, because I'm rendering the product to the app element. Let's see what happens. Okay, so somebody asking, what is causing the browser to automatically update? Is something native or React plugin you've installed? It's actually a plugin that I've installed. It's a package in NPM. I forget the name, but it actually enables you to do live reload, basically. So yeah, it's a plugin. All right. So this is the component that we have now, but it doesn't have the styling. Why doesn't it have the styling? Because I do have application.css here, so it should have this styling applied to it, but it doesn't. Well, the reason is that class is not a good prop name. It's not an accepted prop name in JSX, in React. So you have to say class name instead of class, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript. Let's see, now it works. We have the styling that we wanted our component to have. So that's our component, product component. Now the problem here is that it's just hard-coded. We want to actually be able to pass in some props and create products of, products that we want to create, not just hard-coded products. So let's do that. Well, it now accepts a props object. And how do you pass props? Well, using the HTML syntax, so the first thing that I want is a title, right? Title is Since this is going to be a string, I can just pass it like a string. I don't have to use the curly braces. The other thing is the price. So I'll pass in the price as well, which is 649.99. And 2 left in stock, which means it's quantity, right? Only 2 left in stock. So quantity is 2 for this product. Now let's use these instead of these hardcoded values. Let's use these props. So props dot title. That's what I want to use there. Here, what I want to use is props dot price. And here, what I want to use here is quantity, props dot quantity. So that's our product component. Why do we use this? Well, this is used to differentiate or escape that you're actually using a JavaScript expression here instead of a static string or just an element. So this has to be here. These curly braces are important. All right, now let's see what happens. Well, it is basically the same thing. So it works. But that's not the only thing in our application. Our application actually uses a lot of these. So we can say that this application has another component that is that we can call product list. So product list has nested products inside of it. And as we said before, products can have other products, components can have other components inside of it. So that's one component. This is a product. This is a product list component, which comprises of all these components. This we can maybe call a header component. And this we can call a cart component. So let's first build this product list component, right? Props, and we want to be able to return products. All right, we want to be able to return products. So let's see the markup for this, which is main and product listing. Right, this is the markup, and then we have a heading, and then we have each product. Right. So let's copy this to our product listing component, product list component, and return it. Okay, so inside here, we can actually render these products. So let's say the first one I want to do is basically this one. And I want to render that. I can do another one, which is some other product, maybe a Yamaha keyboard. And it's 200 and quantity is, let's say it's 10, right? And so we have one product, another product inside of the product list component, right? And we want to render the product list component to the DOM. So this is our root element now. Whenever you use an element here and tell React to render this element to the actual DOM, that means that's your root element. You can only have one root element that you render to the DOM. So now let's see if it works. Let's go back to the shop, and looks like we have some problems. So let's see what those problems are. Okay. Product and product. Let's see. Oh, yep, of course. So it should render product list. Thanks for reminding. All right, now it's working, right? So we have 2 products now. So that's our product list component. And we can add as many as we want, but this is still hard coding, right? We want, what if we have an array of products that we want to render here instead of having to create components by ourselves? So let's have some products. And here I have a list of some products that I'll copy and paste here. And what I can do is, so the one thing that's important to remember is that when you have more than one component, you have a list of components that you want to render, you want to actually return an array or use an array there. And how can we use an array? Well, we can map these products, this product array, we can map this to another array which contains these elements, these product elements. So let's do that. As I said, when you want to use JavaScript expressions in your component, you have to use these curly braces. So let's use product dot products. This is products dot map, and map takes a function that gets passed in the product, right? The single product, and we can basically return this product component's instantiation here, and the title should be product has a title, you see. So product dot title. Price, well, each product has a price, so let's pass that in. Product dot price. Quantity, each product has a quantity, so let's do that. So we can just get rid of this, and all our products are now here. So that's our product list component, ready to go. But what if we want to do something like actually be able to click this button that I'm clicking right now, and this product is deleted? Is there a way to do that? Well, and this is how I'll explain what state is and how it enables us to re-render the DOM using just state and not having to tell React what to do and how to render the DOM. So the first thing to note here is that this is the button that we want to be able to click and in response actually delete this product. How do we do that? Well, JavaScript has and browser JavaScript has callbacks and event handlers, event listeners. So what is that event listener in this case? Click. So you simply say, old school way of saying it in HTML, on click, and give it a function. Well, what should this function do? This function should remove the product that was clicked, right? So this delete button, when I click it, I want to remove that product, basically. So I can pass it a function. Maybe I can say this function, I can just define this function here, delete product, function delete product. And this product will be passed in the ID because let's say we also want to pass in the ID to the product because that will be later used here. So product.id. All right, so I want to pass in that function when a click happens on that cross element. So delete product. And so I passed it a function. So whenever this button is clicked, delete button is clicked, delete product, this function will be called. But I also want to be able to, this function doesn't know which product to remove. So let's pass that. Let's have a function here that we can use. So delete product. Which product? Well, I have actually passed an ID here to product, which is available through these props. So I can simply say here, props.id. Well, that's the product that I want to remove when this button is clicked. And it also gets an event object that is not used here, but it's important to know that an event object is also received by this callback. Okay, so this delete product function is called with this ID, and let's accept that. And let's filter these products. Products.filter, and I want to pass it in a function, and each just P, let's call it P for now. And so products.filter return product or P that ID not equal to the ID that's passed in. So that's basically you're filtering out the product that was clicked. So now this should have one less product when I click one product, right? Let's see now. Okay, so I think I have some errors, one of which is, has to do with class. I can just do class name here. All right. So let's see, when I click this, what happens? Well, nothing happened. But if I look at the products array, and see its length, well, it's 3 now. And before it was 4, and now it's 3. Why is that? Because the event handlers have actually worked, but nothing happens to this, to the DOM actually, and that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to just delete a product and the DOM to render. So that's where state comes in, right? So what happens is that in this scenario, when you want to update the DOM and a user performs an action, and that action removes something from the state of your application or changes something in any way, you want to have a component that has state. So let's create a component that has state. We basically want to turn this product list into a class-based component instead of a function-based component, because function-based components do not have state, and that's why they're called stateless components as well. So that's class, and we'll talk about what class means. It's a new keyword in JavaScript, ES6. Product list extends. So it's basically, if you're familiar with Ruby, it's basically this. It's inheritance keyword for or JavaScript is extends. Extends React.component, right? So when we had a function, we could have just returned some JSX and that's enough. But when we have a class as a component, we have to have a render function. So that's basically analogous to this return call. And this render function has to return some JSX or some elements. So what does it return? All of this. And let's see if it works. Let's see. Well, this is a class, so basically you cannot have this. I was thinking about JavaScript objects because that's also one way you can do it. But render, you have to have a method like this in a class, right? So React.component, I have some problem here. Should not work. So it's working. So why did I turn it into a class instead of it was before it was a function and now it's a class? Well, because I wanted to have state, and you'll see how I use that state. So the first thing you want to do is have a constructor in the class, constructor function. And this constructor function, what it does, it can set the state of this component, initial state of this component. But before you do that, you have to be able to call the super, you have to call the React.component for constructor, because it does some setup, and constructor also takes the props. So you have to do that by calling super, which is basically calling the constructor function of this class and passing it the props that are passed to the product list, right? This is an important step. And here what I can do is this.state. What is the state of this component? Well, it has products. So let's do that. Products are products. These products. This is the initial state of this application, right? So I've set the state of this application and now what I want to do is not just render these products, right? I want to mention the products from the state and use them in the render so that when the state changes, the render method is called again and updated products are rendered to the DOM. So let's do this state.map, and this state.products.map and function, basically the same thing. Okay, so let's see if it works. It does. And now this has to be different, this onClick method, because if you delete products from, we don't want to delete products from this array. We want to be able to delete products from the state of this product list component. How do I do that? Well, I don't have access to the state in this component, and the click happens in this component. So what's the solution for that? Well, the solution for that is to actually pass a function from the parent, which is product list, into product through props, and then call that function when this button is clicked. So how do I do that? Well, instead of calling this delete product function, I will call a function. Okay, let's actually call this Okay. So props, so this is coming from parent, right? From the parent of this this product function, which is product list. So props that on delete click, I want to be able to pass this and then call it here and give it the ID, props.id, right? So this was clicked, and now I have to pass this from the parent on delete click. So let's do that. Product on delete click. And which should it be? Well, we can just say this dot handle delete click, and we can define that here. That bind, we want to do bind is important because otherwise this function will be called in the context of a global object, which we don't want to happen. So let's define this function, handle delete click. This is the function, and basically the functionality is the same, but with some differences. We want to change the state because that was clicked, and we want to remove that product from the state. How do we do that? Well, this dot set state, what set state method does, that it calls calls the render method. Whenever you call the set state method, it calls the render method. And because the render method is using the state and the state is now changed, your application's UI will now, as a result, be changed. So this dot set state. And what do I want to set? Well, products. All the products that I already have are this dot state dot products. But I want to filter them. How do I want to filter them? Well, I want to remove the one that was clicked because it gets past the ID. So return, okay, let's accept an argument. Return p.id not equal to ID. So we have set state to a new product list which does not have that product that was clicked. Looks like I have an error. Handle delete click of undefined. Handle delete click. So I have to use bind here as well because this function is called in the context of the global object. Let's see. Now let's see if it actually works and if it is able to delete this, remove this product from the, yeah, and it happens. So what is state and how does this happen? I'm just setting the state, which is products in this case, to a new list, which is basically the same list but without the product that was clicked. And React is, whenever this set state is called, React will call this render method. And since this render method is using the state, this state.products, the resulting output to the DOM would be different. But you may say, well, if every time I make a change to a product, and then let's say I have hundreds of products, well, isn't it a bit inefficient to do this every time you change the state and the whole product, every product is re-rendered again? Well, that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is something called reconciliation and something called a virtual DOM. So what React does is when you change the state, right, it calls this render method. What it does is that it produces a tree of elements, and what that tree contains is information about, so the tree is, there's a div and has a class product, and it has product details and has title and everything, and there are quite a few of those divs. So that's what the tree contains, right? And when the state changes again, the two trees, the one that was generated before and the one that is generated now with the new state change, they are compared. And React uses some very ingenious, I can say, algorithms and heuristics to actually be able to identify which of the DOM elements need to be changed. And it does not render all of the DOM elements. It actually just changes the minimum amount that is necessary, the minimum amount of change that is necessary. So that is called reconciliation, and we don't have to do anything. We get that out of the box. And we just have to, use state and render our component. And what happens is that React does that comparison for us and does the minimum that is required to update the DOM. So that's why when I said this is declarative, you're not actually saying anything to React. You're not saying, well, when this click happens, you have to remove that node from the DOM, or when that action happens, you have to add a new class to that node. None of that. You don't have to do anything of that sort. You just have to update your state and use that state in the render method, and any changes to the state will cause the render method to call and the DOM to update. All right. So that's our product list.